Hi everyone, and welcome to my coverage of Game 1 from the World Chess Championship 2014. Being the first game of the match, it was very interesting to see which opening the players would go for and whether any of their preparation would be effective. It was also a good indication as to what their mindsets and approach to the match would be. So Anand had white and he opened with d4, after which came knight f6, c4, g6, knight c3, and now d5, the Grunfeld defense, which was very interesting to see from Carlsen. It's an aggressive try from black, and there's lots of theory involved. The question on everyone's minds was whether or not Anand had prepared for this opening, and the answer was yes, which was a little surprising, seeing as Carlsen more commonly plays e6 after knight f6 in the Indian openings when knight f6 is played in response to d4, and he's played the King's Indian on occasion, but generally he plays the Grunfeld after 2 g6. But even the Grunfeld itself was a surprise. It's much more frequent him to play e6 and then go into the Nimzo Indian lines or the Queen's Gambit lines with d5. So the game now followed the main line with c takes d5, knight takes d5, and here we saw the offbeat bishop d2. So the main move, of course, is e4 instead of this bishop d2, and that's a normal Grunfeld defense with a subsequent exchange on c3, and then black continuing with bishop g7 and c5 and playing against d4 and c3 and that kind of thing. And you know, this line with bishop d2 has been seen before, but it's, as I said, a little bit more offbeat. And it now became apparent that Anand was indeed in preparation, because he was blitzing out his moves very fast for almost the entire opening phase. So play continued with bishop g7, e4, knight c3, and now bishop takes c3, instead of b takes c3, which is normal in the Grunfeld. And now this pressure is going to be a lot more, this setup is going to be a lot more solid for white. So play continued with Carlsen castling, and now queen d2, which is the last book move in my databases. So knight c6, attacking d4, so knight f3, and white is enjoying a nice space advantage, and black will aim to play against these ideal center pawns. So immediately Carlsen played bishop g4 with that exact idea of attacking d4. So d5. Now we saw some exchanges. Bishop takes f3, bishop takes g7, quick intermezzo, king takes g7, now g takes f3, knight e5, and here a great moment in the game with Anand castling long. And you know, this looks like a risky choice, given that black can open lines quickly on the queen side, but white will also have play in the open g file. His pawn center is very good, and he's got a bishop against the knight, which generally is a small advantage. And it's of course important to note here that there's no knight takes f3 because of queen c3 check, winning the knight on f3. And it was really great to see Vishy play this move with castling long, because it showed that he was not shying away from sharp lines, and on the contrary, out for some blood and fireworks, which is definitely the right attitude to have for the match, and ostensibly the only realistic way to play for any kind of edge against Carlsen is to force it and make it sharp. So it was very good to see Vishy playing this way. So Carlsen continued with c6, immediately challenging the white center. So queen c3, pinning the knight, pretty much forces f6, and now bishop h3, so this puts the bishop on a very nice diagonal, especially because f6 has weakened the light squares on the king side here, and also because the bishop controls the c8 square, so there's no immediate danger of things like c takes d5 and then rook c8 skewering queen. So c takes d5, e takes d5, now knight f7. Black wants to reroute his knight potentially to d6, which looks like a very stable and nice central square. He can blockade the pawn and make good positional sense, but there are other ideas as well. He can also go to d8 and reroute from there, or he can go to g5, and this is the immediate threat. This is quite an irritating move to have to deal with. Carlsen is always setting his opponents positional problems or problems of some kind, and the problem with this move is knight g5 is coming, or at least threatened, so provokes f4, and now queen d6 attacks f4. Also possible was a5, just looking to open lines on the white king and just open up the a file. There's another possibility. It's probably approximately equal. So anyway, queen d6 and now queen d4 is the best move from Anand in order to defend the f4 pawn. And if I remember correctly, he was still blitzing moves at this point, and therefore presumably still in his preparation. In the World Chess Championship 2013, Vishy was unlucky with his preparation, as I mentioned in the last video, so it was great that it went better for him this time, and I hope we'll see his preparation in action again in game 3, as he has the white pieces then as well. And you know, Carlsen may well avoid the Grunfeld, knowing that Anand is prepared in that opening, but even that is a small psychological victory for Anand, and he's certain to be prepared in many other openings as well. So be very interesting to see how it goes. So in this game anyway, it continued rook a d8 from Carlsen, so adding pressure to d5, and also perhaps threatening e5 next, exploiting this pin from the queen. So bishop e6 puts a stop to that straight away and gets the bishop to a nice square. And now queen b6, offering a queen exchange, which Anand didn't want, so he played queen d2. You know, given the open lines and opposite sides castling, keeping queens on makes the game much sharper, so this is a natural choice from Anand. And after this move, white has ideas like h4, h5, and just, you know, immediately opening lines to the black king. And again, kudos has to be given to Anand for creating such an imbalanced position, given the stakes of the game and of the match. They don't get any higher than the title of world champion. And so, you know, as far as this position is concerned, there are no concrete threats for white just yet, but he can, amongst other things, start mounting pressure against e7, as well as playing h4, h5, as mentioned. So Carlsen continued with the rook at d6, and he has ideas like knight d8, threatening to take on e6, and there's no d takes e6 because of this pin, but also knight c6 is possible. And then after knight b4, things start to get quite tricky for white to deal with. He has to take care not to allow this. And you know, it's tempting in such positions just to start pushing pawns against the opponent's king, but both players are playing very well in not doing so and instead going for piece play. Anand found the best move with the rook he1, adding extra defense to the bishop and also starting pressure on e7. Carlsen continued with knight d8. So he didn't go for this plan with knight d6 in the end after all. It's kind of move that positionally minded club players might play straight away. It's a nice square, it can never be exchanged off, it's blockading the isolated pawn, it makes lots of sense. But moves like that, of course, are routine and not always correct. So knight d8 is what Carlsen played, and his idea is if the bishop moves to play e6 and use this pin on the queen, and if he doesn't move it, then Carlsen is happy to exchange it off because it's a strong piece, and bishop, as I said, is better than the knight, especially if it would go to an endgame with bishop against knight, is generally good for the bishop. So Anand doesn't want to allow this e6 push. Is this grip on preventing black from playing this move is white's claim to any kind of advantage or control in this position at the moment, so moving the bishop and allowing that is undesirable. And you know, Anand was starting to take his time at this point, which showed that he was out of his preparation, or at least couldn't remember this line as clearly as some of the other ones. So this means that Carlsen's deviated from the preparation at some point. Where exactly is not clear, but what was clear was that both players were now over the board, so to speak. And at this point black is about equal, and if he can simplify to an endgame, he might have chances against these weak white pawns. So there's got 4 isolated pawns and 2 double pawns here, so to an endgame virtuoso like Carlsen, this is very nice to be playing against. So of course Anand doesn't want to allow that, so he played f5 here, supporting the bishop and adding pressure to the black king. Carlsen was glad to trade off the minor pieces, so he played knight takes e6. Of course he doesn't want to play anything like g takes f5, because this is just opening lines. White's virtually winning after bishop f5 with the threats of rook e7 and rook g1. Very tough to meet. So knight takes e6 and rook takes e6, the correct recapture. If f takes e6, black's virtually winning with the rook f d8, just attacking d5. So rook takes e6, now queen e7 check. e7 has to be defended, he may as well defend it with tempo, so king b1, obviously best. Rook c8 with pressure down the c file. Rook d1, adding pressure to e7. And this incited rook takes e6. So rook takes e6, a nice square for the rook. Again exerting pressure on the black position. Mostly on e7, but also on f6, because he can undermine with d6 later. So Carlsen continued with rook d8, adding some pressure of his own against d5 again. And you know, it's important to play these calm moves sometimes. Club players in particular always want simply to attack, but of course this cannot always be correct. For example, if black plays instead queen takes h2, this pawn is, you know, waiting to be snapped up. He's losing almost immediately after rook takes e7, king f8 and queen b4. It's a sharp position, but one in which white definitely stands better, and Carlsen of course wants to avoid this, which is why he plays rook d8 instead. So queen e3, and white is aiming to dominate this position on the e file, with the pressure on e7 tying black down. And he's got his bind on e6 ever being played, and he can't evict the rook very easily. So there's definitely something to be said for this position as far as white's concerned, and in theory this looks like a good plan, but white's pressure is actually quite easy to neutralize, and it's offset by his weak kingside pawns. In truth, it's actually starting to look a little drawish at this point, although there's still some ideas to try out. Black has to defend e7, so rook d7, and now Anand sets about liquidating his weak pawns. So d6, and you know, this certainly makes sense. The point is that after e takes d6, f6 has been undermined, so queen d4 attacks f6 and also a7, and this gets the pawn back with a slightly improved position. Excuse me. Similarly to black, white can't get hasty here. If instead queen takes a7, black is taking control with queen c4. And he's getting good play in the center and pressure, although there's nothing that's concretely winning. He shouldn't allow the black pieces to invade like this. And the threat is queen d3 with mate to follow, so white has to play something like queen e3. Then for example might come queen f1 check, king c2, rook c7 check, king d2, queen c1 check, king e2, queen c4 check, and you know, all this activity can just simply be avoided if white isn't allowed to play queen takes a7. So king e1, now queen takes a2, and you know, black has an ongoing edge here. For example, rook e7, rook takes e7, queen takes e7, king h6, queen f6, queen b1, king e2, queen f5, queen d6, queen e4 check, and king f1. So it's approximately equal at this end game. White has 3 isolated pawns, so you know, there may be a slight edge, but it's almost definitely a draw. It's a queen end game. It's notoriously easy for the defending side to get a draw because there's so many checks available. So queen d4, now rook f7 to defend f6. Now Anand liquidates this pawn, so it's another weak pawn, and plays rook takes d6. So he's liquidated 2 of his weak pawns, and it certainly makes sense, but the question remains of how to continue. Objectively, it's very close to equal now. So Carlsen continued with a6, preparing the queenside expansion. So a3, Vishy gives his king some breathing space. Now queen a5. Ideas like queen f5 or queen e5 even is also good. And play along this fourth rank. After f4, queen h5, attacking h2. And given the looseness of the kings, it's still a sharp position, and one slip will spell doom. So it's important to keep the pressure on and try and induce mistakes. So queen d2 simply to defend h2. Now queen c5, ensuring some pressure on whites, pressure on the rook. So now played rook d5, attacking the queen. Queen c4. Now rook d7. And it's actually quite unclear here, and it's hard for either side to make anything concrete. So queen c6, threatening to take the rook. Now I want to keep the rooks on. So rook d6, attacking the queen. Queen e4 check, king a2, and rook e7. And black responds to white's d-file domination with the e-file domination, but still there are no direct threats. So queen c1, now a5, queen f1. Now black would love to play a5 and b5, b4, b3, where he would be winning, but of course white's not going to allow that. Okay, the pawn can get to a4, but that's not the end of the world. So rook d1. Anand has seen what's coming, and he's preparing to defend. So queen c2, attacking h2. So rook d4 to win a4 if black wins h2, and now rook e2, forking h2 and a mate on b2, and also winning the pawn, although obviously the mate is a lot more significant. So Anand, of course, is a tactical maestro, and he's found a resourceful way out of these problems of rook b4, defending b2 and also attacking b7. So Carlsen played b5, and there's no rook takes b5 because of queen c4, winning the rook. And also if rook takes h2 instead here, then rook takes b7, or queen b5 is getting the pawn back with a probable draw. So b5, now queen h1, a very resourceful move from Anand. The idea is queen b7 check, should black now take on h2. And this is in fact pretty much the only move to keep the balance. Carlsen played rook e7 here. If rook takes h2, then queen b7 check, king h6 is best. If king f8 or king h8, white's actually in danger after queen takes b5, and there's mating threats, and a big edge to white, in fact. So after king h6, white plays queen b8 with the threat of queen h8 mate, thanks to this pawn on f4, and white is actually starting to build an edge here, although it's probably still a draw. So yeah, Carlsen played a rook e7, and now queen d5 attacking b5, and now it was clear to Carlsen that there was no way to play for a win, and therefore that he should force a draw immediately with the rook e1. And the threat of queen b1 mate means that white must now play a perpetual, which Anand of course has made sure he has, or else he's just getting mated here. Obviously that's no good. So queen d7 check, king h6, now queen h3 check is forcing the perpetual. King g7, queen d7 check, and here the players agreed to a draw. So it was an interesting opening battle, very level, and great to see that Vishy was willing to try some risky ideas with castling long, and some offbeat ideas of bishop d2 and taking on c3. Obviously he's prepared in this line, so will Carlsen play it again? Will be very interesting to see. Unfortunately, Vishy lost game 2, which was played yesterday at the time of that I'm making this video. But he has white again tomorrow in game 3, so hopefully he can land Carlsen in some more preparation and make better use of it this time around. It really would do so much for his mindset and for the match if he could get a win back. He hasn't actually beaten Carlsen in standard time control since the Bilbao tournament of 2010, so I'm sure it will be a massive deal to Vishy, who was very disheartened after his loss in game 2. That was clear at the press conference, and it's important that things don't just start to snowball, that he keeps his composure and he keeps playing aggressively, as he seems to have made the decision to do before the match began. So I look forward to seeing what tomorrow will bring, and I'll get the video on YouTube tomorrow evening. So I hope you enjoyed this analysis. Please leave any comments or thoughts. Thanks very much.